Thanks for staying to the end of the day and having a chance to hear this presentation. So the title of the presentation, Tornado Destruction, Financial Damage to Homeowners and the Role of the Federal Government. I'm a professor in the economics department here at Case Western Reserve University. This project is a research project that's joint with research collaborator of mine, Daniel Hartley. Dan Hartley is at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. We're actually both graduate students at the same time in California at Cal Berkeley. Neither of us are from Cleveland, but we both ended up in Cleveland. And this is sort of the second project that we've worked on that involves sort of mapping data and GIS to extract information to then analyze some economic questions of interest. It's an ongoing research project, and so today I thought I'd just sort of give you a feel for what we're doing with a highlight of how we're using the sort of mapping software to extract information that we're going to use as part of the project. So before I get going, this is the typical disclaimer you have to show whenever you do anything with someone that's associated with the Federal Reserve Bank system. So the views expressed are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, the Board of Governors, or the Federal Reserve System or its staff. A couple of thanks in case I run out of time. I thought I'd put these at the front. This research is actually funded in part through the Freedom Fellows program here at Case Western. So I'm very grateful of that. And then there was some excellent research assistance provided by 4 undergraduate students, 3 of whom at Case Western and 1 who lives in Cleveland but goes to another university. Okay, so the motivation. So I'm an economist, and my area of research in economics is really environmental economics. And within the sphere of environmental economics, the types of questions that I'm most interested in are trying to understand how individuals perceive environmental risks and how sort of what we do and sort of our well-being interact with the environment and through this conduit essentially of different risks having to do with the environment. So I have several different projects that are working in this sort of environmental risk realm. This is one of them. And there's a few different motivations for what we're trying to do in this project. So the first one is that the aggregate impact of natural disasters in the United States, this could include floods, which I've worked on in other projects, or tornadoes or droughts, or here we're looking at tornadoes. If you go online or Wikipedia or something like this, there's like this big number that'll tell you exactly sort of what the estimated damage is for the entire sort of disaster or the region that's affected. But what's much less well understood is sort of how it impacts sort of the lives of the individuals that were actually in sort of the disaster area. And in particular, what we care about in economics is when, one of the things we might care about is when there's something that's unanticipated or kind of like a random shock, and how people can respond and react to that sort of event, and whether it kind of throws them off kind of their life path or where they are into sort of a place, in this case, bankruptcy or debt or having to sell their home or move or something like that. Or is it something that they can overcome through, say, savings or borrowing or other mechanisms that'll allow them to sort of get over this kind of bump in the road? The second question is most economic models will predict, when you're thinking about risks, whether they be environmental risks or other risks, that one way we want to sort of cope with these risks, one is to sort of protect yourself and maybe have some money for like a rainy day fund or something. The second way would be to try to avoid the risk themselves. So move to a place that's perceived as being less risky. So one question we'd like to know is, individuals who are impacted, say, by tornadoes, do they then decide to try to settle or move to a place that's don't have the same risk? And the third question, which I think is the most interesting and really in some ways is that the largest motivator of the project is there's a long history of the federal government providing federal disaster assistance. It's a very controversial program. One reason it's controversial is that sort of the amount of money that's provided is very well known. You can it's allocated by Congress or by the president. So that's the cost of the program, but the benefit of the program is sort of ambiguous or it's harder to quantify. So pretty much every year in Congress and in the media and after events such as Hurricane Sandy, there'll be a big debate, say, why should the government be spending a lot of money, taxpayer money, to sort of help individuals, deal with an event that might have hit them. For example, individuals that are living maybe on the Atlantic coast might expect to be hit from a hurricane from time to time. So maybe it's not the role of the government or something like that. So despite the, more than 50 years that this particular program, the Presidential Disaster Declaration Program, which is one of the main sort of allocative mechanisms to give money to individuals impacted by disasters, very little is known about sort of how it actually helps people overcome sort of and get past the disaster. So the project goal essentially is to try to say something about those three motivations. So we want to measure the short and longer term financial impacts on individuals that are hit by a tornado, determine whether or not people that are hit by tornadoes are more likely to move to places that might have fewer tornadoes, and then test whether or not people that are hit who have access to federal assistance money from the government sort of fare better after the tornadoes than people that don't have access to this federal government assistance. So data and methodology. So we're essentially using two different data sources that we're combining. So the first data source is this really specific, person-specific credit agency data that has information on credit scores, bill delinquency, personal debt, the home address, or the home address is down to the census block level. So we don't know exactly like your exact house, because that's private information, for example, but we know the census block that you live on. And we know if you move and you move to a different census block. It's a 5% sample of everyone in the United States that has a social security number. So, there's about 20 of us in here, so chances are there's probably one person in here that's in this sample. That's a really nice data set. It was put together using Equifax, which is one of these credit repository companies, and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The research economists there, they worked with this private company to put together this data set and make it available to researchers at the Federal Reserve System. And so since Dan is working at the Cleveland Federal Reserve, we have access to this really nice data. The second thing that we want to link up with this data are where the spatial information comes in. So we want to be able to map the tornadoes, determine which blocks were hit by the tornadoes, determine which blocks were near misses by the tornadoes, and then use that block identifier to kind of match it up with the financial information that also has that block identifier. And that's how we're going to combine the two data sets into this new database that we are creating. The three things that we're going to do, sort of the methodology or the way we're going to try to answer our questions, is to look at people that are in the path of the tornado by their block. So we're calling those people the ones that are hit, and the ones that are just missed. So in a buffer area around the block, I'll show some pictures. We also, these tornadoes, they vary in damage intensity in the same path, of course. So even if it's a very big tornado, like an F5 or an EF5 tornado, essentially means there's extremely destructive wind damage that can sort of decimate structures of any type, at least somewhere in the tornado path. But it's not the case that it's that strong everywhere. So we have maps that, for the most part, can distinguish which parts of the tornado path have the, F5 damage, F4 damage, F3 damage. So we can look at how people, the financial impact on individuals based on sort of this difference in the damage intensity. And the third one here, this is how we're going to try to get at that question of what role, if any, does the federal assistance play in sort of ameliorating sort of negative outcomes after the tornado. So we can look at people that are in the path of a tornado that get the federal assistance and ones in tornadoes that don't. So the way that we do this is not all tornadoes sort of trigger or make financial assistance available to people that are damaged by the tornadoes. And it's not the case that just, say, F5s get financial assistance to individuals and F4s don't. It typically has to do with the overall aggregate damage of the tornado. So one tornado could damage, in the aggregate, more damage. But for a particular person living in that area, the idea is it's not so important that, there were a lot of other people that were hurt. You care about sort of how much you were damaged, right? And so the actual damage for that person will be very similar, like if you're in an F4 part of a tornado that did and did not get this financial assistance. At least that's our hope, our claim. Quick outline of the sort of how I want to highlight a little bit how we're using the digital maps and the GIS software, since this is sort of the theme of our contribution to this conference. So the first step in what we're doing is to find high quality damage path maps. So these are typically aerial pictures that show the tornado path and the blocks that are hit and the blocks that aren't hit. I have an example in a second. Then we load this into GIS software and georeference it so we can pin it down sort of in space and take a shapefile map, which is the census block map, and overlay the two on top of each other. So then we can extract, we can determine which parts of the tornado path were in which census blocks, and then extract the underlying identifying information of the blocks. So then we'll know this block was in the path, this block wasn't, and that's how we're going to match it up with the financial data. Okay, so a quick sort of demo in the last couple of minutes I have, or not so much a demo, but at least an illustration. So here's, like, this is Joplin tornado. This is a very big one. EF5, it happened a few years ago. Joplin actually is notorious as hit more than once in our sample by EF5s that almost had the same pathway. So here you can, the brown part here, this is basically the tornado path. That's where all the damage was. It's a very strong tornado, so it actually scours the earth, and it gets like kind of, pulls up all the trees and grass and everything. So from the aerial shot, it actually looks brown. Here is a National Weather Service map. So National Weather Service in the United States is typically the organization that goes in after the tornado to assess the damage and then make these type of maps, which they're going to say, okay, here's the different areas of the tornado path, and based on the survey damage information after the tornado, we're going to relate that back to what the wind speed must have been during the tornado to cause that damage. And that's how they make the designations of enhanced Fujita scale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can see the red part, that's like the super devastating part, the EF5. So what we do it a couple different ways. So here, this is blown up just on this part that kind of hit downtown, showing what we're doing. So the red here, this is actually the tornado path. So this is what we're calling the hit. And then the gray, this is a 1/2 mile buffer that we make around the tornado path. And then another 1/2 mile buffer. So these guys in here are 1/2 mile to 1 mile away, and here are sort of 0 to 1/2 mile. And the idea is there's some imprecision with exactly where the tornado hits. So right along the edge, we might be getting it a little bit wrong. So what we're going to do is kind of, for most of the analyses, we're going to kind of look at, say, the blue people and use these as the not hits. We know they're very close to the tornado, but we're pretty sure they weren't in the path because they're, even if we had some error in the mapping, they're going to be far enough away as not to be in the path, and compare those to the people that are in the red. The other way that we do it is we take advantage of the really detailed damage information, so the differences in the enhanced Fujita scale. So this is just taking, if we look back on the picture here that has the different gradations, we can actually figure out a better measure of how damaged you were potentially by taking each EF and making a different area and then extracting that and knowing, okay, not only were you hit, but you were hit by, say, the EF5 part, or you were hit by the EF4 part. And we can sort of judge to see if that makes a difference. All right, I think I'm just about doing well here. So we're an ongoing project. We have about 80 maps done. We have about 20 or so left in our initial cull of maps. And then we're going to sort of run the statistical analysis to see if we have enough power, enough information to make conclusions. And hopefully we do. If not, we're going to have to go back and sort of get some more maps and get a bigger data sample. Thanks for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions. I think maybe have 5 minutes or so left.